Welcome to Caroline's Library. Recently, I discovered my favorite kind of weapon power system in manga, where the weapon has a soul or a spirit. Not when a human becomes a weapon, like in Soul Eater or Noragami, but more like when the weapon has an emotional bond with the user, sort of like a symbiotic relationship. And I love this power system so much because it means the character's strength is based on the amount of effort they've put into developing their relationship with the weapon. If they haven't taken the time to nurture their bond, their abilities will be weaker. And with that, when you meet a character who has fully formed powers, you respect them even more because you know they've gone through emotional, mental, and physical trials to deepen their connection to their power. And this development is different than when there's a character who works to improve their abilities with whatever weapon that's available. The bond is the essential piece. Plus, there's no OP character that hasn't worked to become that way. There's no ultimate sort of destiny or inherited power that makes them the best simply because of good fortune or bloodline. And yeah, I know I'm sending a lot of shade towards Jujutsu Kaisen, but let's be honest, Gojo and Megumi have their OP abilities because of their bloodlines. Also, I love Jujutsu Kaisen, and Megumi is one of my favorite characters in all of manga. So anyway, back to the topic of this video. Today, we are talking about 3 manga series that feature this symbiotic bond power system: Bleach, Gachiakuta, and Kagurabachi. And hopefully by the end of this review, I've convinced you to pick up at least one of these manga series. So let's get into it, starting with Bleach. First, let's set the scene. Ichigo is a high school kid who is able to see spirits. But despite this slightly inconvenient fact, he's living a pretty normal life with his dad and sisters. Well, that is until an odd girl named Rukia breaks into his room, attempts to fight off a large spirit called a Hollow, gets injured, and ultimately fails miserably. So cue the moment where Rukia, in a desperate attempt to make sure she and Ichigo survive, transfers her powers to Ichigo, thus kicking off the rest of the series. Because Ichigo is now what's called a Soul Reaper, tasked with fighting off malevolent hollows, which are essentially corrupted spirits. And if this weren't troublesome enough, Ichigo quickly learns just how complicated and dangerous this world of Soul Reapers and Hollows actually is. Cool, so with that, let's take a look at Bleach's primary weapon, the Zanpakuto. In this world, there are individuals known as Soul Reapers who use sentient weapons called Zanpakuto, which allow Soul Reapers to defeat corrupted spirits known as Hollows. The interesting thing about the Zanpakuto is that each one is, in essence, a unique living spirit with its own name, spiritual form, and personality. And at a high level, as the bond between the Soul Reaper and Zanpakuto grows, and when the Soul Reaper learns the Zanpakuto's name, they can communicate with one another and grow stronger together. And because of this bond and the Zanpakuto's unique essence, each Soul Reaper's power is completely different. Let's take a look at some of the more interesting Zanpakuto abilities that you learn about early in the series. Starting off with Toshiro and Hyorinmaru, who are able to create and control ice. And in its most powerful form, it can become an ice dragon. Renji's Zanpakuto, Zabumaru, takes the spiritual shape of a monkey and is able to become an extended jagged whip. In its most powerful form, it becomes a massive snake. And Byakuya's Senbonzakura can shatter into thousands of tiny petal-like blades that can shred opponents to pieces. And in its most powerful form, becomes thousands of swords that rain down on the enemy in waves. Because I'm trying to avoid spoilers and epic reveals, I'm not going to talk about some of the best that happen later in the series, like Kisuke's, Unohana's, and Yamamoto's most powerful abilities. So I'll stop there because this list of unique abilities is very similar to the list of curse techniques in Jujutsu Kaisen and could easily be its own video. So with that, let's switch gears to Gachiakuta. This story begins on the Sphere, which is a floating island that moves around the globe. The Sphere Society is split into the haves and have-nots, where high walls physically separate the wealthy from the poor. The surface of the planet is known as the ground or pit, where criminals and literal trash are discarded from the sphere. It is a toxic, polluted wasteland with pockets of civilization. And on the sphere, we've got Rudo, a teenager with an obsession for trash. Living on the poor side of town with his adoptive father, his days often include dumpster diving to find worthwhile items to bring home and repair. But one day, after returning home, he finds that his adoptive father has been murdered. And in this unjust society, Rudo is blamed and convicted for the murder, meaning his cruddy life somehow manages to get worse because criminals are banished to the ground. Yeah, that toxic wasteland. With the desire for revenge fueling his determination to live, Rudo discovers what the ground is really like and what he must do to survive. So now that the scene is set, let's look at Gachiakuta's power system, vital instruments. In this world, there is a mysterious power source known as thought. Thought can accumulate in objects over time and can potentially turn into spiritual energy known as anima. This is especially common for things like sentimental items. When a person has a sentimental item that they've loved and cared for, it can develop enough thought to become spiritual energy that allows it to awaken as a vital instrument. And once a vital instrument is formed, it can be used by its owner, known as a giver. So take Rudo as an example. He's got a pair of gloves that he has cherished throughout his life. He takes time and effort to maintain his gloves, and because of this, they have become a vital instrument that give him special abilities as the giver. And these vital instruments are essential on the ground because they are the only things capable of defeating trash beasts, which are made up of the trash that's been tossed down from the sphere and have accumulated enough anima to turn into monsters that want to destroy people. So givers and their vital instruments defend the pockets of civilization from these trash beasts. And similar to Bleach, the giver's vital instrument abilities are tied to the bond between the user and the weapon. So let's take a look at some of these unique and creative abilities that we learn about early in the series. First up, we've got to talk about Engine and his iconic umbrella, the Umbreaker. Okay, some of the vital instrument names can be a bit corny, but this is what we're working with. So, the Umbreaker. It serves as a shield, weapon, and transportation device, and it is one of the most overpowered vital instruments in the series. Meaning, Engine has developed his relationship to the point of having an extremely powerful form, where it can transform into a bladed, high-speed weapon capable of obliterating multiple trash beasts. And we are lucky enough to see it in action almost immediately after Rudo crash lands on the ground. Next up, we've got Jabber and his claws called Menkira. The claws on his right hand are poisonous neurotoxins, but the claws on his left hand are hallucinogens and anesthetics. So he can use the poisons to paralyze opponents, and then he can null any pain with the anesthetics. And lastly, we've got Remlin and their writing instrument called, pen. And it can be used to draw a variety of symbols that act as spells or charms. And while the primary use is for defense, like barriers and protection, it can also be used for simple, fun things like fireworks. Of course, same as Bleach, I'll avoid mentioning some of the vital instruments that we learn about later in the series. So with that, let's wrap this up with Kagurabachi. The story follows Chihiro, the son of a legendary swordsmith who forged enchanted blades with immense and consequential power. But those powerful blades made his father a target, and after he is tragically murdered and the blades are stolen, Chihiro sets out on a cold, single-minded path of revenge to honor his dad's legacy by hunting down the people responsible and reclaiming the stolen blades. But his enemies are numerous and include ruthless sorcerers, so he'll need his trusted allies as well as a peculiar little girl if he's going to survive. So with that, let's look at Kagurabachi's most desired weapon, the Enchanted Blade. And as you probably expect, their powers and abilities grow and adapt based on the wielder and the relationship that's formed between the wielder and the weapon. And because of the importance of this relationship, when you become a wielder of an enchanted blade, you enter a lifelong contract, meaning that there can only be one wielder alive at a time per blade. So if you want to claim one for yourself, the previous user must die. But here's the kicker. Unlike Bleach, where every Soul Reaper has a Zanpakuto, or Gachiakuta, where your sentimental item can become your vital instrument, there are only 7 enchanted blades in this world. So if you happen to be an enchanted blade user, your life is on the line, so you better be a brave and capable fighter if you hope to remain the owner of your blade, because stealing it isn't enough to gain its power. So what's the big deal about being a sword bearer of an enchanted blade? I'm glad you asked. These enchanted blades amplify the user's spirit energy to the point where the user's body can't contain it. When that happens, potent and concentrated spiritual energy manifests outside of the user's body, taking specific shapes that can be used to attack or defend. So now, you not only have a super durable and dangerous weapon, you also have spiritual abilities that aid you in battle. And as the bond deepens between you and the blade, you gain access to what's known as the True Realm, where the blade's abilities adapt and grow to the point where you can even access these abilities when you're separated from it. So, with all of this in mind, let's take a look at some of these enchanted blades that we've been able to see in action in the first 6 volumes of this manga. First up, we've got Chihiro and his blade, Enten, which summons goldfish to aid him in battle. As for why, check out the manga to find out, because it is a very sentimental and touching story. So yeah, goldfish. And before you dismiss this as ridiculous and weak, let's take a look at what these majestic goldfish are capable of. Enten's black goldfish releases a liquid that can be used to slash opponents. The red goldfish allows Chihiro to block and absorb incoming attacks, and the tricolored goldfish becomes a sort of cloak that has offensive and defensive capabilities. It greatly, but temporarily, amplifies movement, speed, and agility, making attacks significantly more powerful. And it also gives Chihiro resistance to debilitating attacks that could be used by other enchanted blades. So for a brief time, Chihiro is invincible. Next up, we've got Cloud Gouger that has a few elemental abilities. First, it's able to unleash powerful lightning bolt attacks that do have a notable downtime between attacks. It can also create ice that can instantly freeze the target. And lastly, it can create water that amplifies the first 2 abilities, by acting as a conductor for electricity, or by increasing the amount of ice that can be created. And lastly, we've got Shinuchi, that has insect-themed attacks. First, it can use a spider web to capture whatever it touches. It can also summon a butterfly, bee, or dragonfly wings to launch a powerful attack. And it can create centipede-like constructs that can surround the wielder to unleash high-speed, multi-directional blasts. And of course, like I mentioned earlier, with all of these abilities, they can evolve and adapt, giving the wielder even more powers and attacks. So that covers it. 3 manga series that all feature sentient weapons and power systems that focus on the symbiotic relationship forged between the wielder and the weapon. And I've got to say, this is by far my favorite type of power system. So hopefully I've convinced you to pick up at least one of these manga series, but let me know what you think in the comments. Thanks for popping on to watch this review, and until next time, happy reading.